Because of no Malunga, Jordan Horston slides into the starting lineup. And from three, her ability to stretch the floor.
Caitlin Clark and Sophie Cunningham just made a shocking move together, and the WNBA is in tears, and the basketball world cannot stop talking about what happened because the specific nature of the move these two players have made jointly at this specific moment in the arc of the most dramatic governance accountability season women's basketball has ever produced is something that changes the institutional landscape of the sport in a way that every previous joint move Clark and Cunningham have made throughout this season, however significant each of those previous moves was in its own right, was building toward rather than accomplishing in the specific concentrated and permanent form the most recent move has now produced. The WNBA is in tears not because of anything that has been taken from the institution but because of what the institution has finally had to formally acknowledge has been taken from itself through the accumulated weight of every governance failure the accountability season has documented and every organizational dysfunction the organizational accountability story has confirmed in every institutional decision that prioritized management over genuine accountability in the specific way that the entire arc of the season's governance story has established as the pattern of institutional failure most urgently requiring the comprehensive transformation the Clark and Cunningham joint move has now produced in its most concentrated and its most permanently consequential form. Today I am breaking down exactly what the Clark and Cunningham shocking move involves, why the specific nature of the move changes the institutional landscape of women's basketball in the most permanent and the most commercially consequential way the joint move framework has yet produced, what the WNBA's tears reveal about how the institution is processing the full weight of what the move represents in the context of everything the governance accountability season has built, and what the shocking move means for every stakeholder in women's basketball's commercial and competitive ecosystem whose relationship with the sport's institutional future is most directly shaped by what Clark and Cunningham have chosen to do together at the most consequential institutional moment the Clark era has produced. And stay with me because at the 10-minute mark I am going to show you the specific element of the joint move that every outlet covering the story has been treating as the secondary detail when it is actually the most institutionally consequential dimension of what Clark and Cunningham have done together and the one that changes the institutional story from the most significant single joint player decision in women's basketball history to something that has permanent structural implications for the relationship between individual player commercial power and institutional governance authority in ways that extend far beyond any individual decision either player has made individually or jointly at any previous point in the accountability season's most dramatic arc. The Clark and Cunningham relationship has been the most publicly documented and the most institutionally significant competitive and personal partnership women's basketball has ever produced, and the arc of that relationship across the most dramatic governance accountability season in the sport's history has built toward the specific institutional moment the shocking joint move has now created in the most concentrated and the most permanently consequential form the partnership's commercial and institutional trajectory could produce. Every previous joint move, the combined Jordan brand deal, the If She Goes I Go statement, the coordinated advocacy that built the governance accountability coalition's most important institutional dimensions, all of those things together have been building the specific institutional conditions that make the most recent shocking joint move the most institutionally consequential single decision the partnership has produced. The institutional conditions that build toward a joint move of this magnitude require the specific combination of commercial independence, institutional credibility, and governance accountability standing that the entire arc of the accountability season has been producing in the partnership's most important institutional dimensions, and the specific moment the shocking joint move arrives is the moment when all three of those institutional conditions have reached the specific simultaneous peak. That makes the joint move's institutional impact maximally concentrated rather than simply significantly consequential. Clark's commercial independence, established through the $3 billion commercial ecosystem, the Jordan brand combined investment with Cunningham, the NBC relationship, and the entire arc of the commercial developments the accountability season has documented, has reached the threshold at which a joint move with Cunningham creates commercial consequences that the WNBA's institutional management cannot manage through any response that falls short of the genuine institutional acknowledgement the move most specifically requires. Cunningham's institutional credibility, established through every costly advocacy choice and every institutional battle and every personal and professional cost absorbed in the service of the governance accountability effort the season has built, has reached the threshold at which her participation in a joint move with Clark gives the move the first-hand institutional credibility dimension that the commercial authority alone cannot provide. And the governance accountability standing the partnership has built through the entire arc of the season's most consequential accountability developments has reached the threshold at which a joint move creates the most institutionally complete governance accountability demand the partnership's combined institutional authority has yet produced. Let us start with what the shocking move specifically involves, because the precise nature of what Clark and Cunningham have done together is the analytical foundation of everything that follows, and the mainstream coverage has been treating the dramatic institutional impact of the joint move without examining the specific institutional claims the move most directly makes and why those specific claims accomplish something institutionally distinct from every previous joint decision the partnership has made throughout the arc of the accountability season's most dramatic chapters. The shocking move Clark and Cunningham have made together is not simply another commercial announcement or another advocacy statement or another institutional intervention in the governance accountability story the season has been building. It is a specific and formal institutional action that uses the combined commercial power, the combined institutional credibility, and the combined governance accountability standing of the partnership to create a permanent and specifically documented institutional change in the relationship between their individual and joint commercial ecosystems and the Wnba's institutional governance authority that cannot be undone through any subsequent communications management or governance response that fails to formally address the specific institutional claims the move most directly makes. The specific nature of the change the move creates is the institutional dimension that the mainstream coverage is treating as the secondary detail of a dramatic story when it is actually the most consequential institutional element of the entire joint decision, because the change the move produces in the relationship between the partnership's combined institutional power and the Wnba's governance authority is the permanent structural element that makes the joint move institutionally transformative rather than simply commercially significant. But here is where the analysis needs to go beyond the move itself and into what the Wnba's tiers most specifically reveal about how the institution is processing its most consequential implication. Now let us talk about what the Wnba's tiers reveal, because the specific nature of the institutional tiers is the analytically significant layer that tells you the most about what the shocking joint move has actually accomplished in the most concentrated and the most permanently consequential form the partnership's combined institutional power could produce. The Wnba's tiers are not simply the emotional expression of an institution that has experienced an unexpected and unwelcome institutional development. They are the specific institutional response of a governance apparatus that has just formally encountered the permanent structural change the shocking joint move has created in the relationship between the partnership's combined institutional power and the Wnba's governance authority in the specific form that makes the full institutional weight of that change impossible to process through the standard management mechanisms the governance apparatus has been applying to every previous accountability pressure the partnership has generated throughout the arc of the season's most dramatic chapters. The tiers are institutional in the specific sense that they reflect not the personal emotional response of individual governance figures to an unexpected development, but the aggregate institutional acknowledgement by the Wnba's governance apparatus of the specific permanent structural change the shocking joint move has produced in the institutional landscape the governance apparatus is responsible for stewarding. The Wnba's tiers after the Clark and Cunningham shocking move are the institutional expression of the governance apparatus formally acknowledging that the partnership's combined institutional power has produced a permanent structural change that the governance apparatus's institutional authority cannot reverse through any management response that falls short of the genuine institutional transformation the change most specifically requires, and that the entire arc of the governance accountability season has been building toward as its most permanently consequential institutional destination. That specific form of institutional acknowledgement is the most consequential governance accountability outcome any partnership decision in women's basketball has ever produced. And understanding the tiers in those terms rather than simply as the dramatic emotional expression of institutional distress is the analytical work that produces the most complete account of what the shocking move most specifically and most permanently accomplishes. Now let us talk about what the shocking move means commercially, because the commercial dimension of the joint decision is the institutional layer that has the most direct and the most immediately measurable implications for every stakeholder in women's basketball's commercial ecosystem, whose relationship with the sport's institutional future is organized around the specific commercial proposition the partnership has been building throughout the arc of the accountability season's most commercially significant institutional chapters. The combined commercial power of the Clark and Cunningham partnership, documented most specifically through the Jordan Brand combined deal, the individual commercial relationships that together constitute the $3 billion Clark commercial ecosystem and Cunningham's Adidas relationship, and the specific commercial infrastructure the partnership has built through the NBC deal and every other commercial development the accountability season has produced, creates commercial implications for the shocking joint move that extend beyond the individual commercial significance of any previous joint decision the partnership has made. The specific commercial change the shocking move creates is the most commercially concentrated single institutional decision in women's basketball history, because it simultaneously changes the commercial proposition the partnership represents to every brand partner, every broadcast entity, and every commercial stakeholder in the WNBA's commercial ecosystem in ways that make the commercial implications of the move impossible to evaluate simply through the lens of any single commercial relationship or any single institutional decision, without accounting for the combined commercial weight of everything the partnership's combined institutional power represents in the specific commercial context. The Clark era has built as women's basketball's most commercially significant institutional period. The WNBA's commercial partners are processing the shocking joint move against the specific commercial proposition their investments in women's basketball's most commercially significant era represent, and the commercial assessment those partners are making of what the move means for the commercial infrastructure of the WNBA's most commercially significant institutional period is the most commercially urgent institutional consequence of the joint decision beyond its governance accountability implications. Now let us zoom all the way out, because the Clark and Cunningham shocking joint move and the WNBA's tears in response represent the most institutionally consequential single moment in the governance accountability story the Clark era's most dramatic season has produced, and understanding what the move accomplishes in its most complete institutional form requires examining both the specific institutional change it creates in the relationship between the partnership's combined institutional power and the WNBA's governance authority in the broader institutional context the entire arc of the governance accountability season has built that makes the shocking joint move the most permanently consequential single decision the partnership's combined institutional authority could produce at this specific institutional moment. The entire arc of the governance accountability season has been building toward a moment in which the accumulated commercial power, institutional credibility, and governance accountability standing the partnership has developed through every previous joint decision and every individual advocacy and commercial development reaches the specific threshold at which a joint decision creates a permanent structural change in the institutional landscape that the WNBA's governance apparatus cannot reverse through any management response that falls short of genuine institutional transformation. The shocking joint move is the specific institutional moment at which the threshold has been reached, and the WNBA's tears are the institutional acknowledgement that the threshold has been crossed in the most permanent and the most commercially concentrated form the partnership's combined institutional authority could produce. Remember the most institutionally consequential dimension of the joint move? Here it is. The specific institutional change the shocking move creates in the relationship between the partnership's combined institutional power and the WNBA's governance authority is not simply a commercial or advocacy change that the governance apparatus can manage through its standard institutional response mechanisms. It is a permanent structural change in the institutional architecture within which the relationship between individual player commercial power and institutional governance authority operates in the WNBA's most commercially significant era. And the permanence of that structural change is what makes the shocking joint move the most institutionally consequential single decision in women's basketball history rather than simply the most commercially significant or the most governance accountability impactful joint decision the partnership has produced in the arc of the accountability season's most dramatic chapters. Here is what the mainstream coverage is almost entirely missing about the shocking joint move and the WNBA's tears, and why together they represent something more institutionally consequential than the immediate drama of the most significant single joint player decision in women's basketball history. The specific permanent structural change the move creates in the institutional architecture of women's basketball's commercial and governance landscape is the dimension that has the most lasting institutional implications beyond the immediate commercial and governance accountability dimensions. The move's most dramatic elements most naturally foreground. Professional sports institutions operate within institutional architectures whose structural elements determine the specific boundaries of individual player commercial power and institutional governance authority in the most fundamental and the most permanently consequential form available to the institutional actors responsible for defining and enforcing those boundaries. The Clark and Cunningham shocking joint move has produced a permanent structural change in those boundaries in the specific form that makes the institutional architecture of women's basketball's most commercially significant era irreversibly different from what it was before the move. And the WNBA's tears are the institutional acknowledgement that the irreversible change has been produced in the most permanent and the most commercially concentrated form the governance apparatus's institutional management could not prevent through any response that would have required, falling short of the genuine institutional transformation the change most specifically requires. The second hidden angle is the specific effect of the permanent structural change on every future joint decision the partnership makes and every individual decision each player makes within the institutional architecture. The shocking joint move has permanently altered, because the specific institutional change the move creates determines the boundaries within which every subsequent commercial, advocacy, and governance accountability decision the partnership produces will operate, and defines the permanent structural conditions under which the partnership's combined institutional power will function in the governance accountability story's most consequential remaining chapters. My verdict on the Clark and Cunningham shocking joint move and the WNBA's tears is this, stated without any qualification or hedging. Caitlin Clark and Sophie Cunningham making a shocking move together while the WNBA is in tears is the most institutionally consequential single joint player decision in women's basketball history, because it has produced a permanent structural change in the institutional architecture within which the relationship between individual player commercial power and institutional governance authority operates in the WNBA's most commercially significant era, and the WNBA's tears are the most honest and the most institutionally complete acknowledgement of the permanent structural change's full institutional weight that any governance apparatus has produced in response to any individual or joint player decision in the history of professional women's sports. The first reason this verdict is correct is the permanent structural change dimension. The specific institutional change the shocking joint move creates in the relationship between the partnership's combined institutional power and the WNBA's governance authority is the most consequential permanent structural change in women's basketball's institutional architecture that any single joint player decision has produced, and the permanence of that change is what makes the shocking joint move institutionally transformative rather than simply commercially significant or governance accountability impactful. The second reason is the WNBA's tears institutional significance. The tears are the institutional acknowledgement that the permanent structural change has been produced in the most concentrated and the most permanently consequential form the partnership's combined institutional authority could produce at this specific institutional moment, and that acknowledgement is the most consequential single governance apparatus institutional response the Clark era's most dramatic governance accountability season has generated from the institution whose governance authority the partnership's combined institutional power has most specifically and most permanently altered. The third reason is the institutional transformation the move makes unavoidable. The permanent structural change the shocking joint move has created in the institutional architecture of women's basketball's commercial and governance landscape makes the genuine institutional transformation the WNBA's governance apparatus's most adequate response requires not just urgently necessary and institutionally unavoidable but structurally permanent in the form that the partnership's combined institutional authority has most specifically and most permanently established as the institutional destination the entire arc of the governance accountability season has been building toward. The strongest counter-argument is that the shocking joint move's most dramatic institutional implications are being overstated through the governance accountability framing the entire arc of the season's most consequential chapters most naturally produces, and that the specific permanent structural change the move creates is more limited in its institutional scope than the most dramatic elements of the governance accountability story most naturally suggest. That argument has genuine merit as an analytical proportionality concern. The counter to the counter is that the permanent structural change the shocking joint move creates is precisely calibrated to the combined institutional authority the partnership has built through the entire arc of the accountability season's most consequential chapters rather than being overstated through the governance accountability framing, and the WNBA's tiers are the most direct available evidence that the institutional weight of the permanent structural change is exactly as consequential. As the most comprehensive institutional analysis of what the move accomplishes in its most permanent and most commercially concentrated form most specifically requires. So tell me in the comments right now, does the Clark and Cunningham shocking joint move represent the most institutionally consequential single joint player decision in women's basketball history, and does the WNBA's tears in response represent the most consequential governance apparatus institutional acknowledgement the Clark era's most dramatic governance accountability season has produced? Drop your answer, because this is the institutional accountability question the entire arc of the governance accountability story has been building toward as its most permanently consequential institutional destination.